Before we get too far into this, I wanted to wish Jody happy birthday. It's nice of you to join us on your birthday.
Thank
Happy
you.
birthday, Jody.
Way to celebrate it. Thank
It's
you.
a good way to celebrate it. And we have some wonderful people joining us today. We have Greg Brockman from Magnum Companies. If you could wave, Greg. We have your good friend Jody Pinto. And we have Keith Crawford, who worked with her as an architect on this project. Just wanted to introduce a few others. We have Katie Stiegel, whom I think you have met. She's tech support and all things public art. Barry Sparkman is one of our project managers. He'll be taking questions in your chat box if you have any questions. Doug Oland, who's there in print, is our collections manager. He takes care of all the things we build. And then we have friends from around the country. Bob Booker, as I mentioned, our chair of our public art committee. And with that, why don't I just turn it over very briefly to Katie to sort of talk about where the bathrooms are in case you need a break and that sort of thing.
Oh yeah, our housekeeping for these is a little bit different than telling people where the bathrooms are, because you know where they are. They're at your own homes. This is a very casual artist talk here. We're so lucky to have Jody and Keith and Greg with us to talk about this remarkable bridge. The way that we are going to do this is there is a presentation that we'll go through. It'll last about 30 minutes, and then we'll have time for questions at the end. You are welcome to type your questions into the chat box, and we will go through them at the end. And then you can unmute yourself to clarify your question, and we can chat more. But if you could, just keep yourself on mute during the presentation. We will be recording this presentation, and it will be shared on our YouTube page. I'll pop the link into the chat box there. You could also find our archive of previous workshops. We've been doing workshops on this platform about once a week for the last several months. So we have a nice cache of great professional development workshops for artists. So please check those out and share them. Coming up later this month, next week, we have a workshop with Sarah Conley Odenkirk, an attorney from Los Angeles, who is going to teach people about copyright and creative people. And then we have 3 more artist talks coming up about 3 more projects that we have completed building in the last year. We wanted to make sure that we were able to celebrate the projects that we completed in 2020, even though it has been a real challenge to do the traditional ribbon cutting ceremony. So we wanted to make sure we could tell the stories of these projects and share them, and we're so lucky to do that today. Okay, I think that's all for me. I'm going to mute myself and let's get to the good stuff.
Thanks very much, Katie. Let me see if I can get my technology to work here. Assuming everybody can see this just fine. Okay, thumbs up to that. You know, we talk quite a bit. I guess I should introduce myself. I'm Ed Lebo. I'm director of the Public Art Program for the City of Phoenix Office of Arts and Culture. And we talk a lot about how public art is not a solo act. And this list of names here and agencies and all the rest gives you some indication of how many people and agencies and forces were involved in this project. It started out as a Loop 202 pedestrian bridge at Elwood. When it was completed, Jody thought it'd be a great title to call it the Rio Del Rey pedestrian bridge, since that's the neighborhoods it connected. What's interesting about this project is that this was part of a $1.9 approximately $1 billion new freeway loop, 22 miles that would have, in theory, the first year, though I think COVID has probably affected these predictions, 117,000 cars a day, 190,000 in 2035. And basically what it does is it connects the south side of Phoenix I-10 to the west side of Phoenix I-10, allowing traffic to move off to the west and avoid going through downtown Phoenix. It's an easier access out to California. I-10 goes straight on out there and then on through Texas, so on the south and east side. The bridge itself was going to be right here, and in fact, before it was even a bridge, it was going to be a tunnel. ADOT had proposed just having a connection there that would be underground to connect those two neighborhoods. And in all candor, there was some talk among city officials at the time that this would be a great sort of tunnel of doom. Connection is great, but we worked very hard with ADOT to change that tunnel view to a bridge view. And this bridge was a tiny hair on the tail of a very large dog. The bridge in total was about $2.1 million when all was said and done. And you can see how that measures up in a $1.9 billion project. Flying in ahead of a lot of the work we did, one day I looked out the window and there it was. There was the corridor that this bridge was going to sit across, and you can see that red mark there. What I did not realize at the time was that the original alignment for the bridge was going to be this U shape, and I don't know if you can see I'm not even going to pretend to use my cursor, I'll screw things up. But you can see that U-shaped yellowish gold section that goes out into the green field. That was going to be part of the alignment of the bridge. And so essentially it took kids, families away from the neighborhood out into an area where you don't have eyes on a site. And all of us in public design know that you want eyes on your projects. You want people to be able to see other people as they're using these sites. And thus began, I think, some of the early thinking on Jody's part and on the team's part. And Jody came back with this idea of creating a zigzag form, that is the Z alignment, as we called it. And it did several things. One, it kept the bridge in the neighborhood. And if you can kind of imagine this turned sideways and overlaid, you see where that zigzag would be. It led from one end of neighborhood street to another on the other side, about a 400-foot span. But the thing that Jody's initial idea did was it cut off about 174 feet of walking distance. And so by changing a box, sort of a concrete box girder to a steel truss, we were able to reduce the amount of walking, which in the heat out here is always helpful. And it also brought that bridge right into the neighborhood. Well, I think all of you know that when it comes to public policy and changes in assumptions and designs, none of these things are very easy. So there were numerous meetings about this. Here's Jody with Councilman Michael Nowakowski, who is a great supporter of this project. We had open houses, discussions, and quite honestly, quite a bit of advocacy for the position of the bridge to be as Jody had proposed it. One of the interesting things about this whole project is that up there in that list of the collaborators, you may have seen the Connect 202 partners. In this instance, what the State Department of Transportation did was it actually gave the money for this project over, and I'm turning this into a Reader's Digest version, but it essentially gave the money for this project over to a private partnership consortium that then ran the project. Those of us in public art rely on established relationships, protocols, knowing who to call to get answers and all those things. All of that stuff had to be reinvented to carry out this project. And so all along the way, we were sort of finding our way through the mist and the dark sometimes to figure out who had the right answers to the questions we needed to get answered to be able to move ahead. Finally, that alignment was approved, and I'll spare you all the details. And the reality is I would like to say that Jody sat in a few meetings, and there we were out there building the bridge. But you know what? There are a couple people I need to sort of give some shout outs to. One is Maisha Harris right there. Maisha was our key liaison with our street transportation department. And so she led the charge in working with both ADOT and the Connect 202 teams to get the answers whenever we needed them. Extraordinary woman. Keith Crawford, you'll hear more from today, Jody, and then Elizabeth Grajales. Elizabeth retired recently. She was our project manager on this and always has the pink umbrella in the sunshine. So without these people, quite honestly, none of this stuff could have been possible. And at some point, when you see them or meet them in a restaurant or in a bar and there's alcohol involved, you may get the true story about how all this occurred, because it's almost impossible to tell. Jody had to produce not one design, but 4 distinct designs. And I'm not talking about revised designs as we talk about in public art. I'm talking about new start to finish designs. And only God and maybe your friends know why you didn't quit somewhere along the way, but you stuck with it. The whole team stuck with it, and we produced a bridge that I think you'll see is just an extraordinary, extraordinary masterpiece. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Jody, and really just pose a simple question. Is that I know this is not your first bridge, and so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you did in Fairmont Park many years ago, and how you began thinking about the bridge and its design.
Okay. Thanks, Ed. And also, thank you for doing such a lovely introduction for Maisha and Elizabeth. This was my first fingerspan bridge. This was my first permanent project. And one of the things that is extremely important for public artists is the conditions of the site. This was a beautiful nature trail in Fairmount Park in Philadelphia. I was commissioned by the Fairmount Park Art Association, now the Association for Public Art, to do something in answer to the community's need for a passageway. What you see are very steep stone steps created in the 1930s as part of the WPA project. You're on a nature trail. This is a beautiful, beautiful, wild park. You go up the stone steps. You don't have a minute to reflect and stop, because in front of you is a very, very steep wood and iron bridge, staircase, which you rush down when you can, because it's a very dangerous stair. So I began to think about light, which was one of the conditions that was extremely important in the development of a bridge. Light has always been a major factor in all of my work. It's something that when I was a little girl, my father was an artist, and he would develop photographs in the bathroom in a tank. And one of the things that he was always saying to us was, children, don't open the door because the light will bleed. And that saying, light bleed, was such a profound thing for me to hear as a child. It made me think of light as something that was physical, that could flow like water into a room if you opened the door. Later, as I began to travel, Egypt, Israel, North Africa, I also saw the extraordinary conditions that were caused by light in the souks, the marketplaces, where someone walked in front of you, the wood beams overhead would ripple across their clothes like water. So all of this, and for many artists, light is an extremely important condition. For me, it's central. So I began to do a series of drawings, and the form of the bridge began to take on the form of a bridge that touched, which is what a bridge does. It begins in one place and it moves to another. It's like throwing your voice, being in this two different places at the same time. But in this case, it's the hand that creates. It's also the hand in Michelangelo's painting in the Sistine Chapel that passes spirit and light from one place or one person to another. And so Sam Harris, engineer, he and I began to design this bridge. I wanted Corten steel because Corten steel is a performing material, and I try to use performing materials whenever I can. When it rains, Corten creates a protective coating over it and also begins to feel like and look like tree bark. So here you see the light coming through and casting these circular shadows on everything. Next slide. Yeah. Here you also see that the bridge moves from the apex that you achieved when you climbed the stone stairs, and then, unusual, it continues your climb through the bent finger. So you're not coming from a climb into a flat bridge. No, you're continuing the climb. And you can see the Corten matches the bark. The other aspect of this was, how do you get 9 tons of steel into a very precious place in the park? Sam was a pilot in Vietnam for medical emergencies. And I suggested that we do it by helicopter. Here you see the digits coming from the staging ground across the river to the site where a crew welded it in place. As each digit came through the trees, not a limb was broken. Next. And here you see one of the conditions was light, okay? And then you see that one of the conditions was weather. There's snow in Pennsylvania. You can see 360 degrees around you as you walk through this bridge. Next slide. And here we have the first passengers through the bridge. Next. Now we come to, as Ed mentioned, the numerous designs for the bridge, the Rio Del Rey Bridge in Phoenix. Now, in Phoenix, you have light incredible. And so immediately, light was going to be the major collaborator in the development of this bridge. Because the bridge is primarily for children of the Rio Del Rey community, I wanted the bridge to excite the children as they walked through it. And I wanted that to change every day, every hour. And so at this point, you see one of the designs. Next. And here, as we kept evolving these designs, we began to narrow our designs and narrow the material that we would use to do what I just spoke about. Keith, you want to continue here? Keith? I don't think. Ed, can you jump in and contact?
How about that? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Wonderful.
Yes.
Well, as you said, we did this a number of times, and one of the, it was interesting that happened because each, there was a different script and a different arc to the evolution of each of these designs and a reason why You know, we had to begin again. But one of the funniest things was that, you know, everyone that we worked with at the city, at Arts, the engineers that were involved in the project were so supportive. And, you know, Jody, you and I have done this a number of times. And you frequently take the art budget and are anxious to apply that to other budgeted items in the larger project in exchange for, you know, having a say, how do the ramps look? What are some of the other things around here and some of the other public accommodations that we might spend some of our money on, with the cooperation of the engineers and the others that are doing the larger infrastructure project. And that happened here as well. And we never, you know, there was nothing but cooperation and goodwill. And it's a charismatic, fun thing. It makes the art budget more impactful when you're able to do that. And then for one reason or another, and in my opinion, some of the reasons weren't very good, to tell you the truth. Some of the earlier designs were canceled and we'd start over again. So that was always, you know, it was interesting in this project. It's always different. The bad guys existed on a whole nother level that we never saw or really had a great deal of interaction with. And of course, it was out of our control. It had to do with the way this thing was set up. But what a joy it was, to tell you the truth. Even, you know, if there was a lot of frustration in evolving these different schemes, but it was really always such a joy working with everyone in this room and the other people. You know, which you know, they're on to other projects now.
Well, we also, I mean, hold this slide, Ed, because this also, Keith, gives an idea of how this design progressed, and the fact that we were in constant contact with Greg.
Yeah, I think that Greg had
terms of-
selected some of these to show, as a matter of fact, you know, pull back the curtain and show, you know, the beginning of his involvement and where he began to, you know, really, you know, make this into a design that could be fabricated and built with the kind of precision and
Well,
which,
he also, I'm sorry, he
Go ahead.
also, one of the things that was terrific about working with Greg, he, you know, he showed us various openings that would be possible in the panels, but many of them were regular openings. In other words, they formed a pattern. And I wanted a kind of magnificent chaos because, frankly, when you're a young kid, that's a wonderful part of your life. That things are not regular; they don't form a pattern. And so he kept coming up with something that would approach that, and that the final decision that we made on the non-regular pattern of the panel openings was perfect. And then, could you go past the next slide? Next slide, Ed. Ed, can you hear me? Ed? Keith, maybe you can.
maybe there's a
speak to
hand
Ed.
signal.
Can you? How do we?
Hello, Ed.
Ed's having a
Haley?
hard time unmuting himself. Ed, can you please go to the next slide? One moment, please.
Sure. He's waving.
I'm going to text him.
Well, in between, while we're doing this, I can talk a little bit more about the Perforation Selection. Originally, we had this really beautiful brown slot that Jody had chosen in a staggered pattern. But because we had so many different shapes and sizes, and especially being in a triangular, there was no way to configure them to have it not look crowded at one end and too spaced at the other. Basically, the perforations were walking off the page. And this is where we came up with a random pattern with a variety of sizes. We also had to do that to meet the requirements of ADOT. They didn't want a certain size and shape maximum in the openings. So between all the parameters, we ended up going with the sort of what I call a bubble pattern, which is a random array of various sizes of round holes. And that was what the final version was in our mock-ups and then also in the build.
Yes, and what was wonderful about that was that it did exactly, you can see in your mind what you want, but it doesn't always work out that that's not only what you want, it's beyond anything that you could have anticipated. And remember, then we started to work with, I wanted color to be part of the experience of going through the bridge. And so Ed, the next slide, there you can see the random patterning of the panels. And
Can everyone see this slideshow now? Sorry, we made a little mini change. Ed is going to have to hop off for a second because he's having computer troubles. But
Okay.
now we should be on this slide with a drawing on the left.
Yes.
Okay. Ceiling panels.
Yes.
Please proceed.
So I told Keith and that I wanted color in this, because if we could get color in the roof, then you would also have a wash of color that would change every hour, every day, every season. And so we started speaking again with Greg as to how we could do that, how that would be possible. And Greg, we went back and forth, and Greg was a tremendous help to create that, to get where we needed it in the ceiling, at the angle that we needed it. And as you can see, and will see in the slides, all of this comes to fruition. Next slide. And there you see the roof of the bridge. And on the right, you can see the effect. It's in close-up, so you don't see the total effect of the blue polycarbonate slab, but you get to understand it there. Next slide. Greg?
You want me to take over for a little bit, Jody? Give you a break?
You bet.
Okay. So we're big on producing mock-up samples for a lot of reasons. You can draw for days and days and put out beautiful drawings, but it's hard to represent the true detail of fit and finish and the hardware and what the perforations really look like, what it feels like to rub your hand across it, the reflection qualities, what it would do out in the light, what it does in the darkness. And this really helped in this project. So we started off with small samples that we could mail back and forth to New York, but also so that we could just show something to make sure we were headed in the right direction. And this bubble pattern gave us a lot of latitude, which we found out later we would desperately need due to the fact of the truss's design, and that every opening was going to be a different shape and size. I think the next slide shows the full-scale mock-up. So this one was done for a variety of reasons. One, to get a real feel for the entire structure, the panels, the faceting. As you can see at the upper portion of the aluminum perforated panel, there's a taper to the shade portion. And the reason for that is each panel is pitched within the opening. You can see that in the opening below. That's also done that way. That was Jody's intent, was to have this faceted so that during the day, as you drive underneath the bridge, or even in the evening, you would see this moving component, this faceting to the bridge all the way down on both sides. We incorporated that also into the lid, and that's where the skylights came in, and that's a polycarbonate panel of a variety of colors to Jody's choosing. The other part of the mock-up that really helps is then we can prove out the theories that we've been talking about. You know, is this perforation pattern going to open it up? Is it enough open without being too open? Does it meet our engineering requirements? And obviously it's being scrutinized quite thoroughly here in this photo. In addition to that, we were able to take the lighting designer and come back in the evening, set up his lights, and make sure that the reflection quality off the ground was performing, that there was enough amperage in the lighting, that there was enough color in the lighting, because Jody was very specific about wanting a blue hue. They used a blue colored lens to produce that. And again, net result is it turned out absolutely spectacular. It's gorgeous, and everything worked, but it wasn't without a lot of effort and a lot of hard work on everybody's part. And I do believe that a mock-up like this, it would have been a huge mistake to not do this mock-up, because it really did tell the story, and it gave us confidence to move forward with fabricating all of this, knowing that there wasn't going to be one of those, ooh, it looks like that when we're done.
Actually, I'd like to jump in and say, Ed, you wanted to say something?
Well, no, go ahead, Jody. I was just going to ask Greg about, you got in on this project pretty early in design, and that's something we like to do, but how helpful is that as a fabricator?
It's huge, and we've worked together enough times and been in the scenarios where we weren't given enough time, we weren't involved early, and when you're trying to meet all the requirements, all the challenges, you know, ADOT wants a certain opening size maximum. Obviously, the artist wants a certain look and appearance. We want to be sustainable. It's got to meet engineering requirements. It's got to meet code requirements. It's got to fit the budget. You start to get all these challenges thrown at you. If the design has gone too far along without conversing with a qualified fabricator,
Mhm.
you can get way off track. And that derailment can oftentimes cause the project to not ever get built. If the budget is X and the project is going to be 3X,
Mhm.
that's not going to happen. That's not going to work. And we know that. So it's good to help a fabricator understand what you're doing early on. And it's actually a lot of fun. That's part of what makes this so exciting, is you get to be involved in various designs that came and went, which is okay. And then we came up with a design that was the final, that was spectacular. And I feel like we as a team did a terrific job in solving the
For
problems
sure.
and the challenges that we had.
You know, everything you've just said, Greg, it is absolutely true. And artists who work in the field of public art know that as well, that if we don't connect very, very early on with a fabricator, it makes the rest of the project very difficult, very difficult. And so, yes, we began very early on this project. I also wanted to say just quickly, when you work with collaborators, they often have ways of working as well in terms of progression, and who they have to work with in order to deliver their best work. And one of the things Don Happ, who was the lighting designer for this project, one of the things that he did was to work with the prescribed lighting designer for safety light. And I wanted blue, and it just worked out that Don was able to work with the ADOT and 202 group to deliver intense blue that would provide safety at night.
I could throw in a word here, Jody, if I could. You know, you mentioned Don Happ, and this was crucial. We knew, and you knew, that you wanted something that really glowed at night. And so Don Happ was brought into this. But we also brought in the city's public works team, whose job it will be ultimately to take care of these lights. And
Yes.
so, you know, once we had determined what lights they were, we had these guys give it a thorough going over to make sure they were durable and met all the, I think, sustainability standards that we needed to achieve.
Yes. Don got along famously with them, evidently. And here you see him running some tests.
Yeah, and I can talk a little bit about those tests. There was a lot of discussion about gaining the greatest reflectivity off the surface of the walkway in that bridge. And that was a real challenge. Standard concrete, sort of the gray of standard concrete, can dull the luminescence of reflective lighting quite a bit. So
Mhm.
Don, you know, went through all of the steps he needed to go through to try and determine just how much brighter we could make that surface. And that's what you see him doing here, testing that reflectivity ahead of inserting these the blue films that create the blue lighting
Yes.
for the entire bridge.
Yeah.
It's a key part of the whole process.
Yes. Yeah, so it created, working with all of the different contributors in terms of bringing this to fruition. You know, every aspect of this bridge is drama. During the day, during the night, it's just an extraordinary experience.
And then finally, the Stinger Bridge and Iron, who worked down in Coolidge, Arizona, they do bridges all over the nation. They were doing the truss. And so finally that truss was delivered and brought in. And I think really this is where the big work on your end, Greg, really began. I mean, you've been producing panels, mock-ups, all those sorts of things, but having the bridge in place really set you up for doing the detail work you needed to do. How did you sort of work your way through the fact that every panel had a different dimension?
Well, let me back up just a step so we can talk about why every panel had a different dimension. One, the way the design was done with the predetermined arc in the length of the 414-foot long bridge forced each opening to be unique. But in addition to that, the bridge was pre-stressed. And so when it's set in place, it's going to level to a degree or drop, which then changes the size and shape and diagonal dimensions of the entire bridge. In addition to that, when they poured the concrete, that put another load on it, which changed the dimension again. Originally, we were figuring a 6-month build to perforate the panels. I'm oversimplifying, but to measure, perforate the panels, do all the finishing work, fabricate all the Z-clip connectors, and install it. And because of the delays in getting the truss bridge, no fault of Stinger's, we got pinched down to 2 months to get all this done, which posed a real significant problem because at one point there was directive to, well, go ahead and build the panels. It won't change that much. Nobody wanted to take that responsibility to perforate hundreds of thousands of dollars of aluminum and then find out that it doesn't fit, especially me. So we worked a different schedule to run staggered shift and nighttime work to get the panels built in time to be able to get out there and get it put in place. But as I mentioned, every one of these openings, each one of those triangular shapes has a different degree and a different length. And because the panels are faceted or pitching, each Z-clip connector had to be formed to a diagonal. That diagonal had to meet the opening. So there wasn't this opportunity to, well, let's build 414 panels all the same and then stick them in place. It was, let's build each individual opening. So everything had to be labeled and brought into place just as it is now. We assembled it off of the bridge, putting all the Z-clips in place, carried them onto the bridge, or rather, we didn't carry them, we lifted them on with a boom, and then handed it over to the installers, and then they went from each location, of which everything was labeled and marked on each piece part, so you knew not only which end goes up, but also which panel goes into which opening. And here they are with a couple panels in place, working around the security railing, which is what those 2x4s are. The guys are tied off. They're tied off at all times on the bridge. You can't move from one section to another without being connected for OSHA requirements and fall hazard. And here they are with a JLG booming in to put the perimeter suicide fence in place. And we repurposed the drywall mechanism they used for sheeting the lid of homes and buildings, and just modified it to work for aluminum so the guys weren't trying to lift it, orient it, line up the holes and put it in place. Everything had to be installed from the inside, which made it an additional challenge. It would have been a lot easier to work from the outside or up on top. But because of serviceability requirements for the city, we wanted to be able to remove any panel at any time to replace it if it were to get vandalized or damaged in some fashion.
You know, I'd like to add something here that I don't think has been talked about. The original bridge concept from the Connect 202 partners and the Department of Transportation was a bridge that had sides but no ceiling. And so it was an open structure that we didn't think was going to live long-term as a safe structure. And so one of Jody's ideas very out of the get-go was, let's enclose this entire structure so that it's safe for people crossing it and safe for drivers moving underneath it. And that partly explains the extensiveness of all this work. It sort of opened up the palette from just being a create sides for this bridge to do a whole sculptural enclosure. And I think that, as you'll see in the coming slides, really made an experiential difference to the whole bridge itself. We can go on to the next slide.
I love that photograph. It's wonderful. Well, both photographs. The one with the workers is terrific. I mean, you can just begin to see, and you know, one thing that was wonderful about this was Greg would send us photographs as, of course, the cladding was put in place, and because of the pandemic, we couldn't travel. So every time you sent Greg photographs to me, it was wonderful to see those photographs, but it drove me crazy because I couldn't be there. I mean, just look at look at this, and the bridge is the panels aren't even complete, but you can tell, oh boy, what's it going to look like when they're complete. And
Yeah, and
as a matter of fact,
I have to say, as being involved in the project, is that you never really know what a design is going to feel like until it goes vertical. You can do all the drawings you want, you can do all the mock-ups you want, but you really don't know what a work is until it begins to take shape in the dimension that it's designed for. And when these panels began going up and we began walking through the bridge early on, this pixelated light, this kind of, made you feel like you were in a Seurat painting, just completely shattered all of the physicality of the bridge, which was just,
yes,
from our standpoint, extraordinary. You can go on to the next slides, I think. Greg, while you were involved and your team was involved in building this, I know you had to design individual triangular panels. Were there any other surprises along the way that you had to sort of adjust to carry out the installation?
Well, there were so many, we probably don't have enough time. But a couple of the really big ones were that they wanted to get the freeway open by a specific date. And so we had to change our schedule and work over the active freeway portion only, which meant changing our fabrication schedule and changing our install schedule and working from the middle out instead of starting at one end and working to the other, which was our original design or original intent, along with measuring. I think just all the complications of then getting that done in what seemed like a crazy short time frame, then working from an active freeway. So from that point forward, everything we did was over an active freeway. The panels were all in place, both on the sides and the lid over the active portions. But as we got into the landscape and everything else, we were not over the active portion. However, it still made, well, you're not just going to walk across down underneath. You're not just going to drive up and park. It changed the installation procedure dramatically. And there was a lot of that. The whole project had interesting twists and turns and challenges. But I wouldn't trade it.
Thanks.
Really
same
turned out
here,
spectacular.
same here.
I want to point out time real quick. We are getting close to 11 o'clock. We can continue going so that we can have questions if everybody is okay with that. Is that okay with everybody? I'm seeing nods. Okay, we'll just keep going then. I think we've got a few more slides and then we'll go into some questions.
And these are slides of the completed bridge. And feel free to chat on those. Great keys.
Aha, and here we are. It's this, when I look at this slide and a number of the other ones, it reminds me of 1930s films where the sidewalk will be tilted to express fear or craziness, or it's theater. I often say that public art is public theater, and you look at a slide like this, and it's a stage. It's a beautiful, beautiful stage of shadow and light and color and reflection. It's just wonderful, and that's because what a team, what a wonderful group of players and partners. And one of the photographers said that the kids couldn't wait to get up in this bridge and ride their bikes because the streets down below were but to take your bike up here was fun and a thrill.
And I have a confession, you know, in public art, we take photographs and projects can easily be made to look way better than they are at times. These photos actually document what that bridge looks like in reality.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
breathtaking. So
And here
thank
you
you,
have
Jody
the
and
night
Keith
view.
and Greg, for sticking with this process all the way through.
Yes.
Thank you for sticking with us.
Yes. Thank you.
You know, one thing with all of the light and patterning, which is of course spectacular. I mean, the other thing that I think is a wonder is it's like walking through a Swiss watch almost. The craftsmanship and the precision with which it's fitted in there is really a thing to behold. And you know, I mean, as architects, we try and do our drawings so tight that you know, you don't need a great fabricator. You just need somebody to do what's drawn. But you know, you can't sort of legislate that kind of precision in craft. It really is a wonderful job, and Greg and his team, you know, my hat's off to you. I really think it was very well executed. Very well executed. You
Very
keep
kind of you to
somebody.
say, and I have to say the credit, it doesn't go to me, it goes to the team. You know, Darren and Nate, Dave and Dale, Derek in the field, the guys just did a tremendous job. I navigated us through the initial designs and sat through laborious meetings with ADOT. I had the easy part. They had the real challenge, especially when we got the word that each opening was going to be a different size and shape. And then the schedule got compressed to 2 months. You know, of course, of course we can do it every single time because that's what I do. I say yes. And of course, they question me every time going, no, that answer should have been no, you can't do that. But it all worked out. So I'm super happy that you guys are happy. I love it. And
We're
one of the
very
things that
happy.
makes it really nice for us is it's the closest project we've ever done to our facility. This bridge is only 1.5 miles from our main plant. And that's pretty rare. Normally we have to travel across what seems like the globe to get a big project like this. And this is something that everybody within the company can just on their way home, cruise by and walk across and enjoy. So thank you.
You know, you mentioned something there, Greg, that we didn't touch on earlier, and that was at one point in this project, the thought was that your team would have to go down to Coolidge, Arizona to install panels on the truss that probably wouldn't have fit once this thing settled in and gravity took hold. And so this was one of those bits of serendipity where you were less than 2 miles away and could go back and forth from factory to field and carry out the work that was needed measure by measure. So sometimes we get lucky.
Yeah, we got lucky on this one. That helped a bunch.
So here we are at the end of the slideshow, and as Katie mentioned, we're at the end of time here, but we're also happy to take some questions. I know, Harry, you've been sort of tracking things. Are there any questions that stand out that we can answer at this point?
Yes, there are a few questions. I apologize, it's gotten a little noisy here. Glenn, would you like to unmute and ask your question? Are you still with us?
Looks like Glenn may have had to hop off.
Okay.
But everyone should be able to everyone should be able to unmute themselves now if they want to ask questions as well. So once Barry goes through, I think there's a couple of questions in the chat box. Then everyone should be able to unmute and chat.
Well, I have a question for Greg.
Yes.
For Greg, the fabricator. Have you worked with other artists besides Jody Pinto? And if so, or if not, could you say something about your experience of working with Jody?
We have worked with a lot of public artists over the years. with tremendous talent, tremendous vision. This was different.
Oh,
Jody had a passion from the beginning that was very drawing. It made it easier to endure some of the meetings that we were in and to come up with what seemed like solution after solution and then a new twist and a problem. Jody wasn't going to give up, and it helped make me not want to give up. So it was great, and I think
Well,
Jody and Keith make a good team. Keith plays bad cop, Jody plays good cop, and we
I'm
power
the
our way
good
through
cop.
it. And I think it really did work really well, and it was nice to be able to have the feeling that there was confidence in what we were doing, and so that it didn't get shot down for everything that I would recommend. That say, okay, from a fabricator's perspective, this is a really good idea, and they were both very open to that, until they proved me wrong.
well, and you can also
public art
tell.
standpoint,
fab-
it's stunning.
Thanks.
Congratulations.
Well, you could tell as well when we first met, and I think I've said this before, but you can always tell when someone absolutely loves what they do. And I got that from Greg at the get-go, from the very beginning. So
Other questions? Comments?
Mary, were there more questions in the chat box?
Yes, a comment and a question from Glenn West. Hi, Jody. For what it's worth, I was a member of the jury for the Papago Park project. Your proposal was selected almost instantaneously. How is a wall like a bridge?
there's something the matter with the
The question from Glenn Weiss was, how is a wall like a bridge?
well, they're both. That's. Am I not doing something?
No, if everybody but Jody could mute, that would be helpful right now.
Can you hear me?
Continue, Jody, you're on.
Okay, so that's a very interesting question. How is a bridge like a wall or vice versa? I think you can't compare physically. One is elevated, the other is grounded. But using the word grounded, Papago Park project was about water retention in a desert, and it was grounded completely because of the nature of the conservation. This bridge is also grounded, but it's grounded in a different way. It's grounded in the community. It bisected the community, and it's grounded in terms of its use. It's all about those children that walk 414 feet across a highway. So I'm using grounded in a different way, but that's how they're similar. And it's probably the most important aspect of similarity.
Has the public been on the bridge? Has the bridge been dedicated?
It was dedicated a few days ago, but the dedication was really done with the locals from the area. Ed?
Yeah, the extended answer to that is that people have been using the bridge for a couple of months now, Greg. And it's become a bit of a destination for folks. So as Jody may have mentioned, photographer was out there and the kids were out there riding their bikes. It's a great spot to go out and ride your bikes and enjoy the color and beauty. And also in the evening, families have been taken to walking up there and seeing the lights.
That's wonderful.
Ed, was it you that said that it's like walking through a Seurat painting?
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
It's just completely pixelated, and it dematerializes everything that's there. It's an amazing thing that light can do, and I think that's something you've been working with all your life, Jody.
Yes, yes. It just quickly, when we were growing up, my father had been to Europe with his brothers on scholarships. And he always talked about how different countries had different light. And we would just nod, yes, but until you saw that, until you went to Spain, and then you went to Amsterdam, and then you went to Venice, you understood what he was talking about. And me and my sisters and brothers grew up with that knowledge. Light it's everything.
Jody, this is Bob Booker. I'm a colleague and friend of Elizabeth Grajales to make the broadcast today, but I cannot tell you how many times she said over coffee, on the phone, on the internet, how much she loved working with you and the respect that she had for you as an artist. I just wanted to make sure you knew that. But it was tireless, and she so enjoyed this project and so enjoyed working with you. I just wanted you to know that.
Well, that was mutual. Right from the beginning, she was interested in involving community, as I have always been, and she was just ferocious in making sure that this project happened. She was an extraordinary project manager, and I've been very lucky as an artist to have worked with some amazing, they happened to be women, but amazing project managers, not to mention Ed. I mean, this whole project was blessed, frankly, from the beginning, with people who are ferociously dedicated to public art. So thank you for telling me that.
Do we have any other questions from our participants or comments?
Well, I want to thank everyone for sticking with our tech foibles and sticking with the discussions.
And I think Mike might have a question.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Well, I'm really struck by the difference between the daytime experience and the nighttime experience. I think it's really quite extraordinary and beautiful. In both instances, the transparency, the colors, it's an extraordinary project. And I've got to take my hat off to Greg. I think he was spot on in what he said about the spirit of collaboration needed to pull something like this off. There's just a variety of different disciplines, everyone pulling on the rope in the same direction. It's a great honor to have been a part of this discussion, because I've learned a lot from it, and everyone who's involved with this really contributed to it.
That's lovely.
And I have, since we're wrapping up, there was I had a little biographical kind of observation that I wanted to make, and because I grew up in an area not unlike this, where the interstate came through and opened up a large area to development, and that's something we do well. The private sector does pretty well, and people vote with their dollars to live in the suburbs that will, and that will certainly be one of the outcomes of this loop. And, you know, we all have, maybe in Southern California, where I was from, we certainly have, and I'm sure it's true for Phoenix too, we have ambivalent and mixed feelings about that kind of growth, especially the explosive growth that happens under conditions like this. And so, I mean, from an architectural standpoint, yeah, it's really great. I feel great about participating in this because although we do this industrial kind of explosive production of housing that people, you know, love, and these will become people's houses and neighborhoods that they will love, that doesn't make a community. It needs also this public component and a thoughtfulness and precision and craft that the public sector can only accomplish in projects like this. So I see this as kind of a down payment. I mean, there will be a lot of growth in this area, and it'll continue to change, and there will be infill and new things to come. And I'd like to think that we've contributed something that's a little bit different than the things the public or the private public, that the private sector is going to respond to, you know, at least in the next few years, as you know, the floodgates are released, if that makes any sense.
Well, it touches on something that I always think is true, is that these big infrastructure projects are in some ways the greatest expression of common purpose we have. These are things we can't do alone. They require enormous teams and also enormous commitment from voters, elected officials, and everyone else all the way along. And I think this bridge represents some of that. And so if there are no other comments or accolades, again, Jody, happy birthday. We're delighted that you can spend it with us. And we're also delighted that all of you were able to spend a little time with us on this. As I started to say before, these are recorded sessions, so they'll be up online as a resource when we get around to it in the next couple weeks. And so they'll be there for you to share with your friends. And I would encourage you to pass this around. We had a small group here, but I think the conversation has been worthwhile. Greg, thanks for your great work. Jody, your great vision. Keith, your great nuts and boltsing all the way through on this. And to my team, thank you for setting up these workshops. They're a great chance to share what we do. Have a lovely day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Everybody. Thank you.